The millionaire thought it was a blind date, until the girl whispered, "I'm just here to say, thank you." Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The rooftop restaurant shimmered above the New York skyline, its golden lights reflecting off glass walls and polished silverware. The soft murmur of conversation mixed with the slow rhythm of jazz. Every table seemed to sparkle, filled with laughter and clinking wine glasses, except for one. At table 14, a man sat alone, adjusting the cuff of his navy suit as if the motion could keep his mind busy. His name was Julian Hart, a self-made millionaire whose face had once graced the cover of Forbes. But tonight his mind was not on business or investors. He had been dragged here by a well-meaning friend who insisted that even CEOs needed a personal life. "It's just a blind date," his friend had said. "Be nice for once." Julian had smiled at that, the same polite smile he used in boardrooms and interviews. Now he sat under the warm light, checking his phone. A text blinked on the screen. Table 14, 7:30 p.m. "Don't screw it up," he sighed, setting the phone face down beside his wine glass. For a man who had built an empire from nothing, the idea of small talk with a stranger felt harder than any merger he had ever signed. He leaned back in his chair, eyes drifting toward the elevator. The doors opened with a soft chime. A woman stepped out. She was not what anyone might call glamorous, no designer dress, no sparkling jewelry. Ava Miller wore a simple navy dress, her shoes slightly scuffed, her hair tied back in a loose knot. She looked around the restaurant, clutching something in her hands, a folded denim jacket, faded but clean, as if it meant the world to her. Her eyes caught the glowing number on the small table sign. 14. She hesitated for just a second, then walked toward him. Julian stood up automatically, trained by years of etiquette, assuming she was the woman he was supposed to meet. "Hi," he said, smiling. "You must be Emily." "I'm Julian." The woman looked startled, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. Then, instead of correcting him right away, she took a seat across from him. The waiter appeared, poured water, and disappeared again. Silence stretched for a moment, filled only by the soft hum of jazz. Finally she leaned forward, her voice calm but trembling slightly at the edges. "I am not Emily," she said, "and I did not come here for a date. Tom's all." Julian blinked, unsure if he had misheard. "I am sorry?" She looked directly into his eyes, her fingers tracing the rim of the denim jacket in her lap. "I came here to say thank you." The air between them shifted. The words were simple, but the way she said them carried something heavy, something that made Julian's chest tighten. He frowned slightly. "Thank you? For what?" Ava's eyes softened, and for a brief moment he saw both strength and sorrow behind them. "You probably do not remember," she whispered, "but you saved my life." Julian's smile froze. The clinking sounds, the background chatter, even the music seemed to fade into a low hum. A flash of memory cut through his mind, rain pounding on asphalt, headlights blinding him, the echo of a scream, the feeling of cold skin under his hands as he pulled someone out of the road. He had tried to forget that night. Now, sitting across from this quiet woman, he realized the past had found him again. Ava placed the denim jacket on the table, smoothing its worn fabric. Inside the lining, stitched in uneven white thread, were two small initials, J.H. She looked up at him, eyes glistening. "You left this behind that night," she said softly, "and I have kept it ever since." Julian's breath caught. The restaurant's golden light flickered against the glass, and for the first time that evening, his carefully built composure cracked. He whispered almost to himself, "It cannot be you." But deep down, he already knew it was. Julian did not speak for a long moment. The lights from the skyline glimmered across his face, catching in his eyes like the reflection of some buried memory he did not want to see again. The woman sitting across from him, Ava Miller, waited quietly, her hands folded around the denim jacket as if it were something sacred. Finally, Julian took a slow breath. "Tell me," he said softly. "Tell me what you remember." Ava looked down, gathering her thoughts. Her voice trembled only slightly when she began. "It was raining that night," she said. "I had finished a late shift at a diner off the highway. I was walking home. I remember the road being slick, the air smelling like gasoline. A truck came around the corner too fast. I heard tires scream, and before I could move, someone grabbed me and pulled me out of the lane. Her eyes lifted to meet his. "It was you. I know because when I opened my eyes you were kneeling beside me. You kept saying, 'Stay with me.' You matter." Then the paramedics came and I never saw you again. Julian's throat tightened. He remembered flashes of that night, the cold rain seeping through his shirt, the adrenaline, the confusion of police lights, and the paramedics shouting at him to step back. He had been driving home from a late investor meeting outside the city when the accident unfolded right in front of him. He had acted on instinct, pulling her out of danger, but he never knew what happened after. "I thought you were just gone," he said quietly. "The police told me you were stable. I checked the hospital once, but they said you were transferred, and then life went on. Or at least I told myself it did." Ava nodded slowly. "I was in the hospital for a few weeks. A broken leg, some bruised ribs. But the real damage was inside. I could not work. The bills started piling up. My father was already in debt, and I was terrified we would lose everything." Her voice softened. "Then, one morning, I got a letter. It said a new foundation was offering to cover a portion of the hospital costs for victims of road accidents. It was called the Heartlink Foundation." She gave him a faint smile. "I did not know at the time that it was your company. But the letterhead had your name on it. And that was when I began to wonder if it was you." Julian leaned back, shock mixing with guilt. He remembered signing off on a dozen proposals to start the foundation, but never looked into who actually received help. "I never knew," he whispered. "They never told me who the recipients were." Ava nodded. "I used that money to get back on my feet. I paid off the hospital debt and took a few classes at a community college. My father quit drinking. We started over. So when I found out the man who saved me had turned that one night into something that helped others, I wanted to find a way to thank him properly." Julian looked down at his hands. They were steady now, but he could feel the echo of that night's rain still clinging to his skin. "You do not need to thank me," he said quietly. "I did what anyone would have done." Ava shook her head. "No, you did what no one else did. That road was empty. If you had not stopped, I would not be here. You may not realize it, but that moment changed everything." Julian stared at her for a long time. He had spent years pretending he had moved on, that saving one person could somehow balance the guilt of running an empire that had hurt others along the way. But now, sitting across from her, hearing how that one act had rippled into someone else's entire life, he felt something shift inside him. He reached for his glass of water, more to steady himself than to drink. "I suppose I always hoped that night meant something," he said. "I just did not expect the reminder to walk in and sit across from me 3 years later." Ava gave a quiet laugh, one that carried a trace of relief. "I almost did not come. I wrote and rewrote what I would say. I was afraid it would sound silly, but when I saw the name Heartlink on the invitation list for a charity event, I took it as a sign. I thought, maybe I can finally say what I have wanted to say for years." Julian tilted his head. "You came here because of that event?" "Yes," she said. "One of the coordinators mentioned your company would attend, so I may have pulled a few strings to get a seat at this table." He smiled, the first genuine smile of the night. "That explains a lot." Ava hesitated, then reached into her small purse and placed a folded napkin on the table. The ink had faded, the paper worn soft with time. "You gave this to me before the ambulance left. I do not know why, but I kept it." Claw. Julian unfolded it slowly. There, in his own messy handwriting, were the words he had almost forgotten. "You matter. Do not forget that." He stared at the paper, his pulse loud in his ears. "I wrote this?" Ava nodded. "It was the first thing I read when I woke up. It was the first time I believed it." Julian looked up at her again, and for a long moment he could not find the right words. The restaurant around them continued its gentle rhythm, glasses clinking, waiters gliding between tables, but between the two of them, the world felt completely still. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Ava, if I had known how much that night meant, I would have tried to find you sooner." She smiled faintly, eyes glistening. "Maybe you were not supposed to find me sooner. Maybe the timing had to be now." "Oh?" Julian looked at her, at the denim jacket, at the napkin resting like a small relic between them. He felt something in his chest that he had not felt in a long time, a quiet, honest warmth that money and success had never given him. For the first time in years, he did not feel like the man who needed saving. He felt like the one who had just been saved. The night had grown quieter. The city outside softened under a light mist. Most of the dinner crowd had gone, leaving only a few tables scattered with half-finished wine glasses and the fading notes of jazz. Julian and Ava were still at table 14, the napkin lying between them like a fragile bridge to a past neither had truly faced until now. Julian exhaled slowly. "You said that night changed everything for you," he began. "What happened after? How did you get from that hospital bed to this?" Ava smiled gently, her fingers tracing the rim of the water glass. "It was not easy," she said. "When I first got home, I could barely walk without a cane. My father was struggling too. We had bills, and we were behind on rent. But after the foundation helped us, I decided I could not waste the second chance I had been given." She paused, as if choosing her words carefully. "I took a part-time job at a local grocery store and enrolled in night classes at the community college. I studied social work because I wanted to help people who were like me, people who felt invisible, people who thought no one cared whether they lived or not." Julian listened in silence. Every word hit something deep in him. He had spent years building a company that prided itself on speed, efficiency, and growth. Yet here was a woman who had built something entirely different, slow, human, and meaningful from the very help his company had once given her. "I started volunteering at a community kitchen in Brooklyn," she continued. "It was run by this old pastor who believed food was a form of dignity. One day, he told me he was too sick to keep it going. I could not let it close. So I took it over. I called it Second Chance Kitchen. It is small, only enough to feed about 100 people every weekend, but it has become a home for people who have nowhere else to go." She smiled again, shy but proud. "Your foundation was one of the first donors who said yes when I applied for funding. I thought it was just a coincidence. But when I saw your name on the approval letter, it all came together. That was when I knew I had to find you." Julian leaned forward slightly. "You built all of that?" Ava shrugged softly. "With help, and with the words you left me. I kept that napkin in my wallet. Every time I felt like quitting, I would read it again. You matter. It sounds small, but sometimes that is all a person needs to hear to keep trying." Julian stared at her, his chest tight with something between awe and guilt. "You have done more with that night than I ever did," he admitted. "I created a foundation, but you created a place that truly changes lives." Ava shook her head. "No, Julian, you planted the seed. I just helped it grow." They sat quietly for a moment, letting the weight of that truth settle. The waiter approached to clear the table, but Julian raised a hand gently. "Could we have a few more minutes?" The waiter nodded and disappeared again. Julian looked out at the city beyond the glass wall. "Do you know the strange part?" he said after a while. "I've thought about that night so many times, wondering if it even mattered. I felt like I had saved a stranger, and then went back to a world that rewards money, not kindness. I stopped believing that small actions could change anything. Tonight, you proved me wrong." Ava's expression softened. Maybe we both needed to be reminded. Julian turned back to her, the question forming before he could stop it. "Would you let me see your kitchen? I would like to know what you have built." Ava hesitated, surprised but not wary. "If you mean it, yes. We will be serving meals this Sunday afternoon. It is not fancy, nothing like this place." She gestured at the elegant restaurant around them. "But it is real." "I like real," Julian said. For the first time that night, Ava laughed fully, and the sound eased something heavy in him. It was not polished or rehearsed, it was genuine. When the bill came, Julian reached for it, but Ava placed a hand on his wrist. "Please," she said, "let me take care of my part." He smiled faintly. "At least let me buy dessert. It is not every day someone thanks me for saving their life." "Baga." "Fine," she said, shaking her head with amusement. "But I warn you, I am not easily impressed." He signaled the waiter, and soon 2 small plates arrived, 1 slice of cheesecake, 1 of chocolate tart. They shared them in comfortable silence, and when they finally stood to leave, Julian helped her with the denim jacket she had carried all evening. The fabric brushed against his hand, and he noticed again the stitched initials JH on the inside lining. A piece of himself had stayed with her all these years without him even knowing. As they stepped into the elevator, Ava looked up at him. "You really do not remember writing that note, do you?" Julian smiled faintly. "I remember the feeling more than the words. I just wanted you to believe you were not alone." She looked thoughtful. "You know, That note did more than remind me I mattered. It reminded me that sometimes even strangers can care enough to pull you out of the dark. That is what I try to give people now, a reason to believe someone still cares. Julian met her gaze as the elevator doors opened to the quiet lobby below. Then you are doing exactly what the world needs, he said. Ava smiled. Maybe that is why I had to find you. To show you that your kindness did not disappear, it multiplied. They walked together toward the street, the chill of night air meeting the warmth of the city lights. As a black car pulled up to the curb, Julian turned to her once more. I will see you on Sunday, he said. Ava nodded, her eyes bright under the streetlight. Yes, Sunday. But next time, leave the suit at home. It does not belong in my kitchen. Julian laughed quietly. Then I will trade it for an apron. The car door closed behind him, and as it drove off into the misty New York night, Ava stood on the sidewalk, holding her denim jacket close. The faint letters inside brushed against her palm. JH. The man who had once saved her life, and tonight, without realizing it, had saved something far greater, her faith in what people could still be. Sunday afternoon came with a chill in the air, the kind that hinted winter was near. The sky over Brooklyn was pale gray, and the streets smelled faintly of roasted coffee and wet pavement. Julian Hart stepped out of a black sedan, dressed in jeans, sneakers, and a gray sweatshirt that looked almost too ordinary for him. For once, he had left his tailored image behind. Ahead of him stood Second Chance Kitchen, a renovated church hall with a faded sign and a line of people stretching around the block. The walls were chipped, the doors squeaked, and the laughter inside carried through the cold air. It was not glamorous, but it was alive. He took a deep breath and walked toward the entrance. Inside, the smell of tomato sauce and garlic filled the air. Volunteers moved in rhythm, some chopping vegetables, others serving plates. In the middle of it all was Ava Miller, wearing a plain white apron with her hair pulled into a messy bun. She looked up and caught his eye, surprise flashing across her face before it softened into a smile. You actually came, she said, handing him a pair of plastic gloves. You said Sunday, Julian replied. And I promised. She tied the apron around his waist, teasing. Do not worry, Mr. Millionaire. Today you are just Julian. He smiled and nodded. Just Julian. The next few hours passed in a blur of motion. Julian found himself behind a long steel counter, scooping pasta onto trays while Ava moved beside him, offering warm smiles to everyone who came through the line. The guests were a mix of faces: elderly men with tired eyes, single mothers juggling children, young people who looked lost but grateful. Each one said thank you, and each time Julian felt something inside him ease. He had spent years surrounded by people who said thank you out of obligation or ambition. But these voices were different. They were real. During a short break, Ava handed him a paper cup of coffee and nodded toward a small stage near the corner. A teenage boy was singing softly into a microphone, his voice rough but full of hope. That is Noah, she said. He used to sleep outside that grocery store down the block. Now he helps here every weekend. Julian watched as the boy finished the song, and the small crowd clapped. There were no cameras, no press, no hashtags, just people who showed up because someone cared enough to make space for them. Ava leaned against the counter, her expression thoughtful. I built this place because I wanted people to feel what I felt that night. When you pulled me out of the road, I thought it was just luck. But now I see it as grace. Every plate we serve is a reminder of that moment. Julian looked around the room, the laughter, the chatter, the smell of bread warming in the oven, and felt something heavy lift from his shoulders. I think you have given more grace to this world than I ever did, he said quietly. Ava smiled. Maybe, but you gave me the chance to start. Later that evening, after the last plates were washed and the tables wiped clean, Julian helped stack chairs against the wall. The hall was quiet now, lit only by strings of soft yellow bulbs. Ava stood near the doorway, sipping the last of her coffee. You handled that pretty well, she said with a grin. You might even survive another shift. Julian laughed. I might hold you to that. Then his expression turned serious. Ava, I had no idea what my foundation had actually done. They never told me your name, or that this kitchen even existed. I want to help properly, no press, no logos, just help. Ava studied him for a moment. You mean that? He nodded, completely. She reached into her apron pocket and handed him a small flyer folded in half. Then come to the fundraiser next week. We are trying to expand to another neighborhood. You can blend in, no speeches required. He took the flyer and smiled. I will be there. As he stepped outside, The evening air carried the faint sound of laughter from inside. For the first time in years, Julian did not feel like a man trying to make up for something. He felt human, tired, messy, grounded, and real. Back inside, Ava watched him through the glass door for a moment before turning off the lights. She had not expected him to come back into her life, but somehow it felt right. Julian slipped the flyer into his jacket pocket as he walked toward the street. The sign above the door flickered softly in the wind. Second Chance Kitchen. Everyone matters. He smiled to himself and whispered under his breath, "You were right, Ava. Maybe second chances are not something you find. Maybe they are something you create." Oh? The city lights reflected off the puddles as he walked away, each step lighter than the last, as if for the first time he was walking toward something instead of running from it. A week later, the old church hall looked different. Banners with hand-painted letters hung across the entrance that read, "Second Chance Fundraiser Night." The smell of fresh bread and coffee floated through the cool November air. Inside, folding tables were dressed with paper tablecloths, mason jars filled with candles, and trays of home-cooked food that volunteers had spent all day preparing. It was simple, imperfect, and beautiful. Julian Hart arrived quietly, wearing a dark sweater and carrying 2 boxes of pastries from a bakery downtown. No one there called him Mr. Hart or Sir. They just greeted him with the same warmth as last week: handshakes, pats on the back, and the kind of smiles that came from shared effort rather than fame. Ava spotted him near the door and waved him over. "You actually showed up again," she said with a teasing smile. "I made a promise," Julian answered. "Besides, I brought dessert." Ava laughed, taking the boxes. "You are already everyone's favorite guest. Muck be." As the evening went on, the hall filled with neighbors, small business owners, and families who had been helped by the kitchen. A local jazz trio played in the corner, while children ran between the tables. It was not a grand gala like the ones Julian usually attended. There were no reporters, no cameras, and no investors in suits. Yet he had never felt more at peace. Ava took the microphone near the small stage and began to speak. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she said. 3 years ago, I was in a hospital bed, wondering why I was still alive. Someone saved me that night and told me 2 words I have never forgotten. You matter. Those words built this kitchen. They built this community. And tonight, they remind us that every life we touch matters too. Her voice wavered just slightly. Julian watched her from the back of the room, his chest tightening. He knew she was not the kind of person who liked attention. But there she was, standing in front of everyone, telling her story with quiet strength. When she finished, applause filled the hall. Then she motioned to him. "There is someone here tonight who has supported this place from the very beginning, even when he did not realize it. Julian Hart, would you come up here for a second?" Julian hesitated, startled. He had not expected to be part of the spotlight. But as people began to cheer, he smiled nervously and made his way to the stage. Ava handed him the microphone. "You once said that small actions do not change the world," she said gently. "But I think everyone here would disagree." Julian looked out at the faces in the crowd, faces that carried stories he would never fully know. He took a slow breath and spoke, his voice steady but humble. "I used to believe that success was measured by what we build or own. But tonight reminds me that what truly matters is what we give back. The smallest act of kindness can outlive every business deal we ever make. You all proved that to me." The crowd applauded again. Someone in the back shouted, "To second chances," and everyone echoed the words like a toast. After the speeches, music played again, and Ava walked beside Julian toward the buffet tables. "You handled that well," she said, "for someone who hates public speaking." He laughed softly. "I just said the truth." They stood near the window, watching the reflection of the crowd in the glass. "Ava," Julian said quietly, "I have been thinking about something. What if we expanded this kitchen, set up another in Queens or the Bronx? I could cover the logistics, hire contractors, but only if you lead it. It should stay yours." Ava blinked, surprised. "You would do that?" He nodded. "I would. Because you turned my one act of kindness into hundreds. I want to make sure it never stops." Modding. For a moment she said nothing. Then she reached out and squeezed his hand. "Thank you, Julian. Not for the money, but for seeing it the way I do." They stood in silence, the faint sound of jazz wrapping around them like warmth. Outside, snow began to fall in slow, gentle flakes, brushing against the window pane. Ava looked up and smiled. Looks like the first snow of the season. Julian nodded, watching it drift to the ground. Fitting, isn't it? A new start. 2. When the night ended, volunteers began to clean up, and people said their goodbyes. As Julian helped stack chairs, Ava found the old denim jacket folded on one of the tables. She ran her fingers over the stitched initials JH and handed it to him. "You should keep it," she said softly. "It was yours first." Julian shook his head. "No, it belongs to this place now, to what it stands for." Ava smiled and folded it neatly again. "Then maybe we will hang it on the wall. A reminder that sometimes one night on a dark road can light up an entire city." Julian looked around the hall one last time before stepping out into the cold. The street was quiet, the snowflakes landing softly on his hair and shoulders. For the first time in years, he felt whole, like the part of himself he had lost that rainy night had finally come home. The following morning, the city was quiet after the night's snowfall. The streets shimmered under a thin layer of ice, and the air carried that clean, crisp scent that only winter could bring. Julian Hart sat by the window of his apartment overlooking Manhattan, a cup of black coffee in his hand and the flyer from Second Chance Kitchen still lying on the table. He had not slept much. His mind kept replaying the fundraiser, Ava's words, and the faces of the people who had come for food but left with hope. For years, Julian had built a life measured in numbers, profits, contracts, shares. But now he kept thinking about something simpler, how one small act, done without calculation, had created ripples that touched lives he would never meet. He realized that impact was not about scale, it was about sincerity. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. His assistant, Mark, stepped in carrying a folder. "Good morning, sir," he said. "I brought the weekly reports. There is also something you might want to see." Julian took the folder, flipping through the papers until one envelope caught his eye. It was addressed to him in handwriting, not printed text. He opened it, and inside was a short letter from a woman named Carol who volunteered at Second Chance Kitchen. "Dear Mr. Hart, thank you for visiting us. I have worked at the kitchen for 2 years, but last night was the first time I saw everyone so full of hope. You may not know this, but many of us were once the people who stood in line for a meal. Ava gave us a reason to stand on the other side of the counter. You gave her the chance to begin. Please never underestimate what kindness can build." Julian set the letter down, feeling something deep in his chest shift. He turned to his assistant. "Mark, cancel the investor meeting for this afternoon. I need to go to the foundation office." "Of course," Mark replied. "Should I ask what for?" Julian smiled slightly. "To make sure our next projects look more like that kitchen in Brooklyn and less like another corporate donation." Later that day, he stood in the conference room of the Heartlink Foundation. The city skyline gleamed behind him as he addressed his team. "We have spent years writing checks," he said. "Now I want us to write stories, real ones. From today on, every grant we approve must include a partnership with the communities we claim to serve. I want accountability, transparency, and human connection. That is how we measure success now." There was a silence around the table before one of the managers spoke. "That will change everything." Julian nodded. "That is the point." That evening, he sent a message to Ava. "I made a few changes today. You inspired them. Dinner this week? My treat, but somewhere less fancy this time." A few minutes later, her reply came through. "As long as it has real food and real people, I am in." Julian smiled at the screen. Outside, the snow had started to fall again, coating the rooftops in soft white. He thought about the denim jacket hanging in the kitchen's hall, about the simple phrase stitched inside JH, and how, somehow, it no longer stood for his name alone. It stood for every person who believed that compassion was still powerful, that second chances were worth fighting for, and that love, quiet, genuine love, was the truest form of leadership there could ever be. 2 days later, the evening sky over Brooklyn glowed with streaks of orange and violet. The air carried the faint scent of rain, and puddles shimmered like glass along the sidewalk. Julian parked his car across the street from Second Chance Kitchen and stood for a moment, watching the light spill through the windows. Inside, volunteers moved with familiar energy, serving meals, washing dishes, and laughing between tasks. He stepped inside quietly, but Ava noticed him almost immediately. She smiled from behind the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. "You are early," she said. Julian smiled back. "Traffic was kind to me for once." She handed him an apron and pointed toward a stack of boxes near the door. "You can start with those. We just got new donations, blankets, canned food, some toys for the kids." He nodded, rolling up his sleeves. The two worked side by side, sorting items and packing them neatly. Around them, the hall buzzed with warmth and conversation. There was music playing softly from a small radio, and every so often someone stopped to thank them. When the crowd began to thin, Ava poured 2 cups of coffee and led him to a small table near the window. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass. "You seemed deep in thought," she said. "Something on your mind?" Julian took a sip of coffee, then nodded slowly. "I went to the foundation this week. We are changing the entire way it operates. No more silent donations, no more bureaucracy. Every project will have a face and a story." "You were right, Ava. Kindness cannot survive behind a boardroom door." Her eyes softened. "That sounds like the man I met 3 years ago on that road." He smiled quietly. "Maybe I am finally becoming him again." They sat in silence for a while, watching the reflection of the streetlights flicker across the floor. Then Ava reached into her pocket and placed something on the table, a small metal key attached to a tag that read "Volunteer Storage Room." "This is for you," she said. "You are part of this place now. You do not need to ask permission to come back." Julian looked at the key for a long moment, his chest tightening with gratitude. "Thank you," he said. "I will not lose it." "You better not," she replied with a grin. "We cannot afford to replace locks." They both laughed softly. It was the kind of laughter that carried comfort, not excitement, the quiet rhythm of 2 people who had walked through chaos and come out whole. When the night ended, Julian helped close up the hall. As they stepped outside, a light drizzle began to fall. Ava pulled her hood up, and Julian instinctively held his coat over her head. She glanced at him, smiling under the faint glow of the street lamp. "Still rescuing people from the rain, I see," she said. He met her gaze, his voice low but certain. "Maybe this time, I am just trying not to lose someone I was meant to find." The rain deepened. The city blurred into silver, and they stood there for a moment longer. 2 lives that had once collided by accident, now moving in rhythm, proof that sometimes saving someone is only the beginning of being saved yourself. The next morning, Julian arrived at the HeartLink headquarters earlier than usual. The winter sun filtered through the tall glass windows, casting long streaks of light across the marble floor. For the first time in years, he walked into that building with a clear purpose that had nothing to do with profit margins or quarterly reports. He had promised Ava that things would change, and today, he intended to keep that promise. He called an emergency meeting with the board of directors. As they gathered around the long conference table, Julian placed a single file in front of him, the internal report from the legal department. It detailed every quiet agreement the company had used to protect its image, including the letter that had once been sent to Ava. When the room fell silent, Julian spoke. His voice was steady, not defensive. "For too long we have measured success by how much we can hide instead of how much we can heal," he said. "This file is proof that we have done good things the wrong way, and it ends now." One executive cleared his throat. "Julian, this could damage the company's reputation if it goes public." Julian looked up, his expression calm but firm. "If the truth damages us, then it means we built our reputation on something false. I would rather stand on honesty than on silence." He announced a plan to release a public statement that would acknowledge the mistakes and outline a new direction for HeartLink, one focused on transparency and human impact. The board members exchanged uneasy looks, but none of them spoke. They knew the decision had already been made. That afternoon, the company's press office released the statement to the media. It was brief, direct, and signed personally by Julian Hart. He took full responsibility for the past and promised reform. There was no corporate language, no excuses, just truth. By evening, the news had spread quickly. Social media buzzed with mixed reactions. Some praised his honesty, others questioned his judgment. But for Julian, the noise no longer mattered. What mattered was the feeling of finally standing on the side of integrity. Later that night, he drove back to Brooklyn. When he arrived at Second Chance Kitchen, Ava was there, wiping down tables after closing. She looked up in surprise. "You saw the news, I guess," she said. Julian nodded. "I did more than see it. I wrote it." Her eyes widened slightly. "You told them everything?" "Yes," he said simply. "I was tired of pretending. People deserve the truth, especially the ones we say we are helping." Ava studied him for a moment, then smiled softly. "That was brave, Julian." He shook his head. It was necessary. She stepped closer, her voice quiet. "You realize this means starting over. The world might not forgive easily." Julian looked around the small kitchen, the scent of warm bread still lingering in the air. maybe forgiveness is not what I am looking for. Maybe I just want to be the kind of man who earns another chance." Ava held his gaze for a long time, then nodded. "Then you are already on your way." Outside, the city lights flickered against the wet pavement. For Julian, the night no longer felt heavy. It felt clean, like the world had given him the same gift he once gave a stranger on a dark road, a second chance. A few months later, spring came to New York with soft rain and blooming cherry trees along the sidewalks. Second Chance Kitchen had grown busier than ever. The new branch in Queens was nearly ready to open, and for the first time, the Heartlink Foundation's name appeared not as a sponsor, but as a partner written in small letters under the sign that read, "Built by many hands for everyone who matters." Inside the Brooklyn Hall, long tables were lined with framed photos showing the journey of the kitchen from its first meal to the fundraiser night. In the center of the wall hung the old denim jacket, washed and neatly framed, with the small initials JH still visible on the inside. Below it was a plaque that read, "Because one act of kindness can feed 1,000. That evening, a celebration took place. The hall glowed under strings of soft lights, and the same jazz trio from the fundraiser played gentle tunes in the background. Julian stood near the back, dressed simply, no tie, no headlines, no cameras. He watched Ava as she welcomed guests and volunteers with that same open smile, the one that seemed to bring light wherever she went. When it was time for speeches, Ava walked to the small stage and spoke into the microphone. "3 years ago, someone saved my life," she said. "He told me 2 words, 'You matter.' Those words became the foundation of everything you see here tonight. This kitchen, this community, every smile in this room exists because someone chose compassion over convenience." Ko Pien. She looked across the crowd until her eyes found Julian. That someone is standing right there, Julian Hart. Applause filled the hall. Julian stepped forward, but Ava handed him something before he could speak, a folded napkin, protected in a small glass frame. "You wrote this once," she said. "Now I think it belongs to everyone here." He looked at the message, his own handwriting faded with time. "You matter. Do not forget that." For a moment he could not speak. Then he turned toward the people gathered in the room and said simply, "This message is not mine anymore. It belongs to every person who gives, every person who shows up, every person who believes that kindness is still stronger than fear. Thank you for reminding me who I wanted to be." The crowd rose to their feet in quiet applause. Ava stepped closer, and in the glow of the lights, she whispered, "Looks like you finally found your second chance." Julian smiled, his eyes soft. "No," he said gently. "You gave it to me." As the music swelled again, the camera would have lingered on the 2 of them, standing beneath the framed jacket and the glowing sign above the door. Everyone matters. The lights shimmered across their faces, and for a brief moment, the world felt beautifully simple. Because sometimes, saving someone on a dark road is only the beginning. The real story begins when that act of kindness finds its way back to you and teaches you that love, when lived with honesty and purpose, is the greatest second chance of all.